Welcome, everybody. This community meeting is the third in a series of community meetings we've been holding for users of our resources, of VEuPathDB resources. We already held one focusing on the vector biology community that use VectorBase. Last week, we held one for the fungal community who use FungiDB. And today, the focus will be on parasitologists or protozoologists who use our resources. Obviously, there'll be a lot of overlap between these meetings. Everybody has the same concerns, and these resources are all funded under the same mechanism, and so the same concerns are universal across all of them. Before we get started, I wanted to remind everybody that we do have a survey that is ongoing. We're collecting data probably until the end of December. So feel free to scan this QR code. We will put this link in the chat as well, so you will have it if you haven't filled it out. If you filled it out, we really appreciate your responses. We're getting a lot of useful and insightful responses, and so encourage everybody to take a few minutes to respond to the survey if you haven't done so so far. For today's webinar or meeting, our goal is to not speak too much. I'm going to turn the screen over to David Roos in a few seconds, and he will walk you through some background, where we stand and what our goals are. But really, we want to focus on answering questions and hearing ideas from you. And as such, that's why we're holding this as a meeting and not a webinar. And we would like people to feel free to chime in or talk anytime. Even while David is talking, feel free to raise your hand. If you raise your hand using the reactions in Zoom, that's the easiest way for us to see it. If you haven't used reactions before, you can click on the react icon in your toolbar in Zoom and then select raise hand from that. If you're very adept at using shortcuts, you can click on Alt-Y or Option-Y for a Mac versus Windows in order to activate the raise hand. And we'll see it. Yeah, so I see, Misha, you tried it out. That's great. It works. And so definitely do that, and we will call on you to ask your question or make your comment. And I think that's pretty much in terms of logistics. So David, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Somar. Can you see my screen and hear me okay?
Yes.
A couple of other comments for people who are joining. We have several hundred people registered for this meeting, but because there are many others who will not be able to attend in live time, we are also recording this meeting, which we will post online for people who would like to see that later on. So be advised that if you have comments or questions, we are planning to record this meeting. We're also happy to take questions offline at any time by clicking on the Contact Us link or emailing help@VEuPathDB.org, or if you prefer, help@TriTrypDB or help@ToxoDB or CryptoDB or whatever resources it is that you are most familiar with using. I also want to mention, as Omar indicated, feel free to raise your hand if you have questions to ask. We will devote most of our time for this hour to questions, but you should also feel free to type any questions or comments into the chat. And we have several members of the outreach staff who are on the call today and who will be happy to respond in chat to the group as a whole or individually as appropriate. So we can monitor the chat and answer those questions when they come up. I really have just one slide to show today. There are a couple of other backup slides and background information, but the important information today is what's summarized in this slide that I'm sharing at the moment. As everyone on this call is aware, I trust VEuPathDB resources have been available for more than 20 years, providing access to genomic data sets worldwide for investigators initially in the apicomplex and parasite community, but for many years now for other protozoan parasites, for arthropod vectors of disease, and for fungi as well, including information on the human and animal and plant hosts that some of these pathogens infect. We've been supported by a variety of donors, including grants and other awards from the Burroughs Wellcome Fund and the Wellcome Trust and the USDA and the WHO and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But for 20 years, the major source of our support has come in the form of a contract from the Bioinformatics Resource Center program sponsored by the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, one of the institutes of the US NIH. The funding for core resources is a challenge for all databases. This applies to GenBank and PDB and model organism databases like Flybase and Wormbase as well, and we can talk more about that later on. But we were relieved to learn a year ago that NIH was planning to recompete the Bioinformatics Resource Center project, and we applied for renewal of the VEuPathDB project. Many of the people on this call signed letters in support of that. We had letters written by each of our individual component communities represented by these logos at the bottom, or a dozen letters that went in support of the project, signed by more than 2,000 PIs from around the world. And we were pleased to learn that this proposal was very favorably reviewed. For those familiar with the NIH review system, we received a score of 20, which is normally a score that one would tank to the bank. And we do now know that indeed this was the top score, was one of the top scored proposals from this solicitation. We were therefore surprised to learn in a phone call with our program officers at NIH in May that notwithstanding the very strong support from the community and the review panel, the VEuPathDB would not be funded because NIH had decided to take the BRC program in a different direction. This has caused quite a lot of anxiety, as I'm sure you will be aware. We announced on the website that the contract supporting this project would end in September. And indeed, on September 15th, VEuPathDB was brought down, leading to quite a lot of concern and dismay in the broader community on social media and in the scientific press. But fortunately, through the generosity of a variety of groups who are concerned about the impact of this decision on global public health, we have been able to bring resources back up online. These resources are not cheap. The cost of maintaining VEuPathDB purely as a static resource without any new data provided is on the order of $600,000 per year in direct costs. And that goes to the cost of machines and the systems and database administration required to keep them up and running, the developer support that's required to fix bugs and to answer even a minimum, provide minimal responses to questions from the community. The project as a whole is a cost of on the order of 10 times that amount. This is more than the amount of funding that we can achieve from an individual research grant. So we are back up online. Sorry, this is a slide from last week. I should have changed FungiDB to VEuPathDB here. The principle, though, is the same. These resources are once again available as a static resource, but fortunately, these funders have provided, in addition to the $500,000 to $1 million a year that are required to keep resources up and running, have provided us with a shoestring budget to reconfigure our architecture in a way that we hope will allow us to resume regular database releases in 2025 and build a path to a sustainable future. But long-term sustainability will depend on additional support. And of course, we will continue to seek support from funding agencies and philanthropies worldwide. But I think it is likely that there is no world in which further support of these and similar databases will proceed without contributions from the end user communities that they support. And this is not a challenge that is limited to VEuPathDB. Some years ago, the Arabidopsis database resource, which had been funded for 15 years by NSF, had lost their funding, and they have successfully navigated their way to financial sustainability through user fees. Their situation is a little bit different than ours, but that is one precedent. There are many other precedents of user-supported resources. Wikipedia, for example, is supported to the tune of more than 90% of their budget by payments from individuals, probably many of the people on this call. And my understanding is that model organism databases like Flybase and SGD and Wormbase are in danger of losing their NIH funding as individual databases moving forward. So this is a theme for the future, and I wish we were not in the vanguard of trying to address it, but that is where we currently stand. And I would like to throw this open to questions. I do have some backup slides to talk about what we are doing and what things cost, but here to jog your thoughts and questions are some questions that we'll be happy to discuss. Happy to provide more information on what the outcome of the NIH review was and what other what other resources the BRC program is and is proposing to cover. To talk further about who has supported VEuPathDB to date and what the costs are and strategies for possibly reducing this. I can tell you that the VEuPathDB user base consists of approximately 100,000 unique users worldwide, more than on the order of 50,000 of whom use the resource, unique users every month, with the average user returning weekly, of course, many more frequently than that. And we can talk about what this would cost individual labs, but I think to a first approximation, the heuristic for that would have to be something on the order of 1% of lab budget, which I hope everyone on this call feels is substantially less than the value to your research group, but it is still real money and something that we need to understand. We do know that these fees can be charged to grants, although that will require careful wording to ensure that this is permissible both to the purchasing departments at individual institutions, to the auditors, and to various different funding agencies worldwide. I'm happy to talk more about why we shut down in September, which I realize caused some disruption, and kudos to the VEuPathDB team for working overtime to be able to bring things back up in short order. And we do have some ideas about functionalities, typos here that could be applied to help our user community further, including efforts to try to ensure compliance with funder mandates for data sharing. But with that, let me open this up to questions. Please feel free to type any questions into the chat or raise your hand if you have specific questions that you'd like to ask. Carolina, feel free to unmute.
Yes, good morning. I wanted to ask, do you know, like, what was the proposal for NIH, meaning that the funding was lost, but was someone else going to be funded, or they wanted some other mechanism, or
yes, I can.
Is there possibility for partial funding through them?
Yes, I can address that. So the Bioinformatics Resource Center program has, over the past 20 years, has involved sequential narrowing of support to fewer and fewer groups supporting more and more organisms. In the initial round 20 years ago, there were more than 10 bioinformatics resource centers. For the last two rounds, for the last round, there were 2 bioinformatics resource centers. As I'm sure you know, Carolina, the VEuPathDB database and vector base merged at that point, as did the bacterial and viral BRCs. In the current round, and of course the NIH solicitation is up for review, is publicly accessible. The RFA sought applications for the same 2 bioinformatics resource centers, one devoted to eukaryotic to eukaryotes, including fungi, protozoa, and the organisms they infect, including both vectors and, of course, humans and other organisms, and the other devoted to bacteria and viruses, although there was the option of applying for one single program. In the last round of funding, each of those BRCs received about $6 million per year, and in the new round, NIH had envisioned a total budget of $9 million, so a significant drop in funding. And the BVBRC, which with us were the top scored reviews in the panel, the BVBRC was continued to be funded, but we were informed that VEuPathDB would not. NIH has chosen instead to fund 3 BRCs, the bacterial viral BRC, and 2 other groups. One of them, for which Aitana Neves and the Swiss Institute of Bioinformatics and Guy Cochran at EBI are the PIs, focuses on Pathogens Portal, a resource that you can take a look at today if you like and see how that may meet your needs. They do a pretty nice job of spidering the web to identify genomic data sets and provide links to those, and have also proposed addressing the challenges of global data sharing by assembling networks of groups and local hubs that ensure that data is accessible. The final BRC that's been supported is brc.analytics, which is an extension of the Galaxy project. Anton Nekratenko at Penn State is the PI on that project, and they propose to expand and extend some of the pipelines that we have provided previously for mapping RNA-seq data and for calling SNPs and for other functionality. Whether that will integrate with other resources in the way that VEuPathDB has provided remains to be determined, but perhaps the most important thing I can say is that that neither of these resources, by their own admission, proposes in any way to replace the functionality that VEuPathDB has provided in recent years. So I see that Omar has his hand up. Carolina, does that address your question, or are there further comments I can make?
That is clear. Thank you.
Omar, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
No, I just want to point to the chats and questions that are coming up in chat, David. So I'll bring them up, and then you can answer,
Yep.
or anybody else can answer. So one thing that I wanted to point out, Carol Gilchrist asked about wording for what can be added to a data sharing or data management plan in grants. This is something we are working on, and we will post that as well on the website and be available to you. Joe Vinetz pointed out that this can be made a component of the DMS document, which obviously is exactly what we're talking about. And then there are a couple of comments about the amount of the fee, which I think is probably the thing that most people, or a lot of people, are thinking about. Joel Dax indicated that he's wants to go on record saying that he's happy to pay a small user fee. The problem is, how do we define small? And if it's too small, then the project won't be sustainable. So I think we probably should talk about that a little bit, David. And that goes along with what Alan Knupfer said, that the 1% of budget, is obviously seems reasonable, but of course the wording needs to go into future grants and so that the money can be allocated for that. There are additional questions coming up, which I will point out in a little bit, but maybe we can talk about the amount of fees first, David, and then I'll move on to the next ones.
Yeah, that sounds fine. I've put up on the screen some information on costs, some of which I've shared, but it's also some indication of what this value is. And those of you who have taken the survey, which is still ongoing, and perhaps Omar or someone else can post the survey link in the chat as well. One of the things we have asked investigators to do is to consider for each of you what the impact of the loss of these resources would be on your research program. And there are many different ways you might want to assess that in terms of how much longer it would take to get publications into print, how much more money would be required to pay local bioinformatics services or hire bioinformatics staff in your group. But while there has been a wide range of estimates of the impact on individual labs, some have said 2%, some 20%, some greater than 50%. I have to say, I think that anyone who says that the impact of VEuPathDB resources on their research program is greater than 50% is probably wrong. If these resources were to disappear entirely, it would not shut down the operations of many labs, but it would make work substantially more difficult. There are few users of these resources whose assessment in the anecdotal surveys we've carried out from hundreds of investigators who suggest that the value to their program is less than 1% of budget. And of course, what that means is that for a lab with a budget of, say, $500,000 a year, the value to the resource is on the order of $50,000 a year. Now, that does not mean that we would or could charge $50,000 a year to anyone's lab. And fortunately, we don't need to. With 100,000 unique users, if for sake of argument, we needed to find $5 million in direct costs per year, that would mean a cost of $50 per person. But we all recognize that there are many, many individuals who are not in a position to be able to contribute even $50 per year. That is true for investigators in low-income countries. It is true for new investigators. It is true from the many hundreds or thousands of university students who use these resources as part of their educational program. So we would like to suggest, so what we envision rolling out probably in January is something that you might think of as a calculator that, like a mortgage calculator, that allows individuals to enter their own information privately. We don't collect any of this information, but based on your lab budget and the scale of your operation, the number of people in your group, and how heavily they use VEuPathDB resources, we can provide an estimate of what your fair share for your group would be. We cannot impose a mandatory paywall for a variety of reasons, including the fact that we are not in a position to be able to assess how accurate this calculator is for your particular needs, and we cannot have these conversations with thousands of individual labs on a one-by-one basis. So there is a substantial degree of voluntary nature of this for what we would need for our community. But looking on my screen, I see, Jeff Dvorin sitting in front of me, for example, and what that would mean is that if Jeff's fair share of this were $5,000 per year, we hope that he would be willing to contribute that, and we would provide an invoice. I see a big thumbs up from Jeff. But if Jeff decided that a fair share was actually $10,000, we would be happy for that. If he decided that realistically in his particular situation, $2,000 or $3,000 would be more appropriate, we would generate that invoice. To Carol's question, this would be listed as a line item on your budget under the data sharing and dissemination budget. So this would be a line item that would probably read something like it would probably read something like data mining and dissemination services, because in addition to providing the services that we have for years facilitating data mining, we are also rewriting our production pipelines to ensure that users of these resources can apply those pipelines to their own data privately to integrate it within VEuPathDB as you're doing your own analyses and writing your own papers. That has the fortuitous advantage to us of offloading QC onto the data providers where it belongs, and means that when you are ready to release that data, whatever time that might be, it may be upon publication, it may be upon review, whatever is appropriate to you, you can check off a box that allows that information to be integrated, seamlessly satisfying the NIH and other data sharing requirements.
So Megan Pavlonis is asking, she has not really spent some time on the BRC Analytics website, and she was wondering whether this would be useful for people to try it out and understand whether it's sufficient or insufficient for their needs. I mean, I can answer quickly in saying yes. I mean, definitely people should try it out. I think they are being funded with a large amount of money to provide bioinformatic resources for you. And if it's not meeting your needs, I think that should be made known either to BRC Analytics or to the program officers. In our previous calls, we've had members of the BRC Analytics joining these open community meetings. I don't see Scott Kane on, who's their lead outreach person. There may be others on who, if they feel like commenting, they're welcome to. But I'm sure they will welcome any criticism, positive or negative, on their resources. So if you end up trying them out and you feel like they are not sufficient, then make that heard. If it's sufficient and great, then that's fantastic for your needs. So yes, I would encourage that.
Yeah, let me add to that a little bit and say that our goal, as I think many people on this call know, is to serve community needs. And if those community needs are met by other resources, we will be very happy by that. I can't for a moment suggest that no one in the world could do a better job than we do. Can't suggest that no one can do a cheaper job than we do. I am skeptical as to whether others could do a better and cheaper job. But if that were the case, we would happily march off into the sunset. Certainly, the scores of individuals who work on this project are well-trained informatics staff and will have no difficulty finding other jobs. I should say that neither the reviewers nor the Global Biodata Coalition feels that is likely. And as I've mentioned, both of these BRCs have indicated that it was never their intention to replace VEuPathDB. They viewed their proposals as complementary to existing resources. But echoing Omar's comment, I would strongly urge all of you to take a look at brc.analytics and Pathogens Portal. Assess the extent to which they meet your needs. Those groups, which are strong bioinformatics groups, would value your suggestions, but do keep in mind that they themselves do not see these projects as a replacement for a one-stop shop database like VEuPathDB.
So a comment from Lou Weiss, I guess, in sort of talking about BRC Analytics, saying that if you go to their homepage, they clearly are still working on the functionality, but they clearly state that their goal is not to replace VEuPathDB. I mean, that would be obviously.
Yeah, I should also say they have run a couple of webinars, and those are available on YouTube. So if you'd like to see what it is that they are proposing to do, you are welcome to take those webinars. And I do want to reiterate that we do not view any providers of bioinformatics resources as competitors, we are all in the same boat. Indeed, part of the reason why it took us so long to why there was sort of such a panic at the last moment to keep VEuPathDB up and running is that as part of the Bioinformatics Resource Center contract, we were required to submit a transition plan that envisioned maintaining existing resources in static form until whatever new resources would be available. And it was only at the last moment that we learned from NIH that despite having been approved by the NIH, they were not going to act on that transition plan. Users of VectorBase will remember, I know Carolina had asked a question earlier, that when VEuPathDB, which supported fungi and parasites, merged with VectorBase 5 years ago, we kept the legacy, we rebuilt all of our infrastructure over the course of a year with no new database releases for any of these databases. But because the look and feel for VectorBase changed substantially, we kept the legacy version of VectorBase up and running for more than a year beyond that, just to ensure that no data was lost, and only shut that down when the community agreed that functionality had been replaced by VEuPathDB. That's what we were expecting would happen with VEuPathDB resources, but sadly that was not to be.
So the other things in terms of, there were a couple of questions again relating to payments. I think most of them were addressed. I just want to point out that, for example, Brendan Ellsworth indicating that, their purchasing department would likely require a hard number posted somewhere. And that's certainly something we're going to have to work on. So this is obviously new and uncharted territory for us as well. And we are learning a lot from many folks who've been in the business of raising funds using different means, including fee-for-service models. And so one thing we are doing is we've been having conversations with various folks to understand how to do this, how to model it, what to post, and so forth. And so, Brendan, that comment is actually really good and important, and certainly something we're going to have to accommodate depending on your needs and how your institution can pay for a service. We will have to provide a way for you to generate an invoice or have it posted somewhere. And this includes donations. So we've gotten questions in the past that, well, what if people want to make a donation and not necessarily pay a fee, but provide a donation? And that will be feasible as well, since we are operating under the umbrella of the University of Pennsylvania, which is a nonprofit organization. The goal would be then to allow or enable donations to the project.
Let me also add to Brendan's comment. Yes, we certainly recognize this. There likely would not be fees because of the very different nature of the individual users and the extent to which they use that. There would be principles along the lines of what we have posted here, but we absolutely would need to provide an invoice tailored to individual groups based on the scale of their operation. And that is part of the reason why. So in addition to scaling favorably with budgets, because a large function of this focuses on data sharing requirements, which to a first approximation track with budget, the initial findings that we received back from financial folks at funders and at the University of Pennsylvania is that this will be acceptable in grants. But we certainly recognize that we need to provide an invoice.
So I maybe want to give an opportunity for others to raise their hands and potentially, or just unmute yourselves if you want to say anything.
I'm happy to go back to the stuff funding, but I've also put up a different slide here indicating what our current priorities are. Many of these are things that we have touched on already. And once again, the recording of this community meeting will be posted up online for future review by people who haven't been able to attend this time around. Rob?
Hi, yeah, thanks a lot for doing all this, and you know, obviously, like many others, massively sad to see that this was necessary, and you know, thanks for all the work over the years and for working keeping it going. I was just wondering, obviously, I think I'm definitely in favour of support from users, and I definitely think there's ways we could do that. Is there, I think alongside that, I think you'll need to also have a more stable income as well. Is there a plan to have sort of low-level funding going alongside, like as you have now for the static resource? And have you spoken to like Wellcome Trust and other international funders for doing this?
We have. We have, and there are so you know, so there are a variety of possible sources of support. I am hopeful that we will be able to rely on philanthropic groups for the day-to-day operations, the cost of maintaining a static resource, and the hardware that those resources run on. I have no promises that that will be possible. I think it is unlikely that that will come from the Wellcome Trust. We've had extensive discussion with both the Discovery unit and the data. Sorry, I've forgotten the name of Tariq Kokar's group at the Trust. But these groups are very interested in solving this problem of how to ensure the sustainability of core informatics resources. And we are hopeful that they will provide support for that. So we are hoping that philanthropic agencies will be able to provide some ongoing costs. We are also more optimistic that funding agencies such as the Trust and the NIH and others will be able to support new infrastructure development for new tools. For example, a new algorithm for OrthoMCL will be released momentarily. We have that's in alpha test form and will be out to the community as soon as we can resume database builds. We have plans for a generic architecture for a single cell atlases for not only those for which these are available, but to accommodate additional data. And of course, technology is continuing to roll on. We have been the fortunate recipients of a Wellcome Trust Discovery Award to Andy Jones, Catherine Crouch, and myself and other colleagues, focused on AI methods for automating genome annotation and extraction of information from the literature. So yes, we envision a mixed model with funding from various different sources. But as I say, I think there is no world where moving forward, at least for the immediate future, individual groups will not need to pay for resources if they want those resources to be available.
So maybe a couple of comments. So one is, I think that it is important for everybody on this call, everybody who uses the resources, to have conversations with your funders when you can, to indicate the value of these resources to you. And I think one thing that's really important is to highlight that these resources are not just another repository of data, because there are many repositories out there that do a much better job to store data for long term than we do. That's their job. But what VEuPathDB resources excel in, which I'm sure most of you agree on, is the ability to mine the data, ask questions about the data, and integrate it in these ways that allow you to potentially discover new things, find new things in the data that's already been published. And so I think it's very important to highlight these features of VEuPathDB to your funders, to program officers that you know. I think the other thing that is important is to highlight that, and David, I'm not sure if you've mentioned this already, but people have been asking, well, how will I actually determine my I think you did mention it, but maybe it's worth mentioning again. And that is that our goal is in January, or around the end of January maybe, is to roll out what we're calling a fee calculator. This will be something that you would be able to run privately, so we won't see this information. You'd be able to input some numbers in there, and then it'll spit out a fair fee that we think, based on the calculation, that your group should pay or could pay. Then how you pay that obviously will be up to you, and whether you pay that will be up to you. And we're talking, we're discussing various models of doing that. But the goal is that, we also don't want this to be something where every individual has to get in touch with us and say, well, how much do I have to pay? And so, because we'll have to hire a staff just to manage payments. And we want to avoid that as well. We'd rather have our staff working on the resource and on the database, integrating new data, developing new tools and mechanisms. And so hopefully the way this will work, it'll be sort of work mostly or semi-automatically, where you basically go in, you fill up the stuff, it generates an invoice, and then you can give it to your purchasing department or work with somebody in our business department to arrange and make sure that your school is a vendor or we're a vendor for your school and so forth. So there are lots of logistics that we'll have to iron out as we go forward.
There's Omar, Luisa Figueredo has her hand up as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah. First of all, thank you, Omar and David, for keeping this alive and keep working on this to have it up and running as it has been over these years. Is an amazing tool. I just wanted to add here a point that Omar just raised when you were telling us what we should be telling our funders, and also as a way of justifying when I have to justify my budget in a grant. I would say I would add not only the mining and querying the data, but I would also add the fact that you train researchers,
Yep,
and this
point.
is really important. And I would also add the fact that because you do some, and they've mentioned this already, because you quality control our data, again, this adds to the reproducibility of the data sets and the conclusions that we reach as a community. And reproducibility across within a field is a huge problem, and many studies say that you cannot reproduce data from one lab to another. And I think here this resource maybe not solve everything, but definitely contributes to making it more reproducible. So I guess
very good points, Luisa.
three other arguments for that.
Thanks for raising that, Luisa. That's absolutely just to give some indication of what happens under the hood, and for example, to explain why it is that the cost of maintaining a static resource is on the order of $1 million a year, but the cost of maintaining a dynamic resource, which is updated on a regular basis, can be as much as 10 times that. When you go to VEuPathDB to take a look at expression profiling data from RNA-seq studies, you can be confident that that data has been mapped and normalized in a consistent way, so that the results from different studies are consistently applied. And this is an ongoing challenge. These days, as many groups are generating single-cell RNA-seq data or small RNA data, different analytical pipelines can yield confusingly different results. And this is a role that we have played from the very outset, when the first population genetic studies were generated for Plasmodium falciparum from several different laboratories and published in high-profile publications. It wasn't possible to compare those results directly, except through PlasmoDB, because the analytical pipelines were run in a consistent way. Let me also mention that, in addition, as Omar mentioned, to discussing this with program officers and citing resources in your papers and in grants, I'll point out that under the About tab, you can grab a logo for VEuPathDB or the individual logos from individual databases to put in your acknowledgement slide. We will also rely on people on this call to do more than simply commit to figuring out what their fair share of payments would be and including that in their grants and making payments moving forward. But we'll also be looking to all of you to help build a culture where it is expected that all of us pay for the resources that we use. And as I have said, this will have to remain an optional activity. We do not want to impose a mandatory paywall that has the effect of disenfranchising investigators who don't have funds to pay for what they are doing. We cannot do so and remain eligible for research grants or for certification by the Global Core Biodata Coalition or the Elixir effort. And imposing an arbitrary paywall would run into difficulties with our university's tax-exempt status. So we don't want to do that, but there is some aspect of altruism that would be involved in what kind of a world we all want to live in. And for those who may feel that there are people who won't pay even if they could, I will point out that there can be cultural expectations. For example, the vast majority of us on this call pay either directly or indirectly the cost of open access fees for publication, making publications openly accessible. But that's not a requirement, right? We could all publish our papers only on the archive at no cost to us. We do so, we publish elsewhere for a variety of reasons and pay those fees, not because they are required by journals necessarily, but because that has come to be the expected behavior of our community. So we will be looking to everyone on this call to help build a culture where these where users contribute the fees that are required to make sure that these resources are available for the community as a whole.
So Benjamin Rosenthal was asking, how might we also derive funding from proceeds of commercial products, drugs, vaccines, etc., invented using these resources? It's a really good point. Obviously, it would be great if we can tap into that. We certainly have had some conversations with pharmaceuticals or drug companies that use our resources, and will continue to do that. And we may have to come up with a mechanism where there's a different fee for commercial versus non-commercial. But of course, if again, this will have to be maybe on an individual basis, but obviously, if you know of products like this that are out there on the market that have used our resources, then we should really approach those companies as well and continue those conversations. David?
Yeah, so I mean, certainly the question of how to engage industry in the biotech sector, which is very important, particularly as users of FungiDB, and in the biomedical sector for parasite databases, and in commercial sectors that are involved in, for example, insecticide development or distribution, is an interesting question. I think it unlikely that we will be able to link this to revenues that are associated with those projects, although I would love to hear thoughts from others who have ideas. But we have talked with a number of biotech companies and pharmaceutical companies who are users of these resources. We've had discussions, for example, with people at ASTMH recently from Novartis. And if Novartis were to pay 1% of their global budget, we could shut down this conversation now. That would more than cover our needs, but it would also clearly be inappropriate, because work on anti-infectives and on the organisms supported by VEuPathDB is a small fraction of Novartis's work. So it's going to require some effort to figure out what is appropriate and what is achievable. It will not be 1% of budget, but it will not be zero, and it will clearly it clearly needs to be more than the cost from an individual lab of 10 members. I see a question from Ellen Knupfer.
Hey, David. Thank you very much. I completely agree we have to pay towards it. I don't quite agree with your open access comparison, right? It's sort of slightly when you pay, because the open access you pay, you incorporate it in the funding, in the grant call, you budget for it in a degree, or you get it via the university core funding situation. So you get it at the end of when you generated the data. I think the problem that we have here is we sort of, because you need data, you need funding now, next year. Grants take a year to come through, right? So you almost want it ahead of time. And we would obviously use the resources ahead of time to main data to a large degree. So it's upfront versus at the end.
So I agree that the analogy is not exact. I certainly will not say that this is a precise analogy, but there are aspects of what you comment on that are not necessarily the case. I mean, especially because funding mechanisms are different in different in institutions and different countries. There are many people on this call who will be laughing at your comment that the funding takes a year to get in place. Sometimes it takes a great deal more than a year, depending on where you're working. It's also true that funding for open access publication in some countries and in some institutions is covered by the granting agencies or by the country. In other places, it comes out of individual research grants. And as far as whether that is, whether those services are needed in advance or afterwards, I would say that it is both. So I don't want to belabor the comparison. I agree with you that it is nowhere near exact. But the fact is, we need that if these are resources that are important to the community, as I believe they are, we will need to budget to pay for that. And I do think that it is useful. I'll reiterate the suggestion that everyone on this call take a few minutes to assess what the impact on your program would be if VEuPathDB disappeared.
No, I'm not disagreeing. I'm not disagreeing with you on this at all. I'm just trying to get a picture of, we have some funding now for this year, right? You need to get it ideally in place as soon as possible.
That's correct. And
right.
we do
so
not,
now we're writing grants. Hopefully we will get what we're writing. But when can you actually get this?
Well, I think there are very different labs, different funding agencies, different organizations are different. For example, we've had extensive conversations with people at the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft. There are several people on this call from Germany, and there is great discretion on the usage of funds. And Katja Becker, the Präsidentin of the DFG, is of course very familiar with VEuPathDB resources as a malaria biochemist herself, and there is no constraint on DFG researchers writing this into their grants. That said, $5,000 contributed to VEuPathDB next year is $5,000 that you can't spend on something else. Similarly, so in the US, where many research grants from the NIH are of fixed size, say at $250,000, it doesn't matter whether you have written this in as a line item on your grant. You are still welcome to reallocate it in the way that you might for buying a new piece of software. But $5,000 that you spend on one thing is $5,000 you can't spend on something else.
Yeah, I'm not saying we're not spending it. We all need it. This is why we're here in this call today. And this is why I don't know how many people we're here now, right? So I think you have all our backing on this. Of course, we're very grateful that it has come back. I'm just trying to do it a bit more practicality-wise, saying how long can you survive with the situation now? By next summer, I need to have raised 2 million. Right. What is that sort of figure? I'm trying. That's what I'm trying to.
So let me tell you where we stand. We have some funding from various different sources, and when we learned that the new bioinformatics resource centers were not going to even be maintaining existing resources, we scrambled to find support, and our initial contact was with funders who have given us money previously, like the Wellcome Trust or the Gates Foundation, all of whom said, oh, this is terrible, I'm sure we can do something, and all of whom came back and said, The days of being able to send you a suitcase full of cash are over. We have processes that we need to follow. And we then went to philanthropic groups like the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative and Open Philanthropy, the Center of the Advancement of Foundation and of Advancement of Science and Medicine, who provided funds for year one. We asked for a 2-year budget. We came up with a 2-year budget before which is the earliest time that we think we will be able to be financially self-sustaining. We have money for the first year of that budget. We do not yet have funds for the second year. We also went to our institutions, the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Georgia, that have been the primary sources of these, and both of them have agreed to waive indirect costs for the duration of this bridge funding period. That's a substantial financial commitment. The University of Pennsylvania has also made a financial commitment to help bridge this gap. So we have funds in place for the first year that extends until September. And we are looking for funds for the second year. And in the second year, we hope that that will be a combination between gifts from philanthropists and payments from people on this call and elsewhere. So we do not expect to be fully funded for the second year. But if we do not make substantial progress, I don't think it will be possible to ask for others to fill in the gap. After 2 years, we are hoping to be fully funded. And to be honest, I don't know what that will look like. We have operated for many years on a budget of total budget of approximately $9 million a year. If we are unable to raise $9 million per year, there are things that we can do for $6 million a year. But I am not convinced that if what we can raise is $3 million per year, that we can provide much advance over resources that are available from NCBI or elsewhere for free. If we are fortunate and bring in $20 million in the first year, then we will simply recalculate and revise our invoicing plan moving forward to a lower number, because we are obviously not a profit-making operation.
Understood. Thank you.
So we are at the top of the hour. So I wanted to make sure, obviously, if anybody has any last-minute comments, I know lots of people have to jump to other meetings and so forth. So we'll keep the line open for a little bit longer. So if people want to stay on and talk or chat about stuff, that's obviously totally fine. I will stop the recording though, and that will be what we will post online. But I do appreciate everybody joining this call, and obviously your continued support is very important and much appreciated. Thank you.